Buenos nachos, amigos, and welcome to Record Breakers, a music podcast where a group of friends gather together, talk about music, talk about albums, one album at a time, like a little book club for music. It's a fun time had by all. I'm Petey Rave, and I'm all dressed up, nowhere to go, for this Dead Man's Party. Here with me is my team, my squad, or at least most of my team. We don't have David. David is on assignment. I think he's on assignment of covering like some kind of documentary that he funded, which is really cool. But he'll be back in a couple episodes. But the rest of the gang is still here. We still got Drew.
Hey.
Yeah. And of course we still have our guest for these sets of episodes, Roberto Villegas, aka Vincent 404.
Here to remind you that Danny Elfman isn't the only 80s band member that became a composer. The other one is Mark Mothersbaugh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everyone forgets Mark from Devo did a whole bunch of compositions. One of them we all here know, that being the Rugrats team.
Yeah. That was awesome. Regression.
Just work on the Rugrats. It's actually, I just worked backwards from, I like the Rugrats, and I was like, what is this? All of this music is so good.
Who is this Mark Mothersbaugh? What is this Devo I'm hearing? Oh! Okay.
Oh.
Come to find out, they're from my backyard. So that's
cool. To find then they are not men.
They are Devo.
Of course, we're here to talk about music. We're talking about an album. The provider of the album this week is Drew. Drew, what do you have for us this week?
Well, I figured I would bring, as everybody might have figured out by now, a band called Oingo Boingo. When trying to pick one of their albums, it was kind of hard. Do I bring something earlier with a bit more ska influence because, well, I'm me? Or do I bring the one with the hits? I decided to bring the one with the hits, and we're going to listen to a little bit of Dead Man's Party.
Yeah, we're going to discuss a little bit of the Dead Man's Party. Roberto,
yes.
What were your expectations coming into this album?
So I was pretty familiar with the group and the album. Honestly, I hadn't listened to the album in a while, so it was kind of sort of fun to get back to listening to it. I didn't remember a lot. It was funny listening to it and kind of figure out what was I expecting. I knew what to expect. I've heard a lot of these songs, and the ones I hadn't heard in a while, I just was like, oh yeah, I remember the song. It's more of what I didn't expect for the album, which is the fact that I didn't quite expect it again or remember it to have been such a bridge between ska and new wave in terms of how it's done. And that was sort of the part it was. Again, I was a fan of the band, so I knew what I was getting myself into. I was like, oh, I forgot how much of a bridge this was.
Yeah. I was aware of the name, and of course I've heard a couple of the songs quite a bit, but I hadn't heard the entire album, and I had some expectations, but I didn't have any assumptions. But I wasn't sure exactly what to expect. I had some thoughts, but I wasn't sure what to expect and didn't expect it to be exactly what it was. But some things met expectations. As we get into how it was musically, Drew, how would you describe this album musically?
Well, the thing about Oingo Boingo, in this era of music in general, like that mid 80s sound, especially in new wave, is there was a lot of bands in the new wave scene. So to do something that stood out and got you noticed above your ahas and things of that nature, you really had to go out there. And we mentioned Devo a little bit at the top, and they were doing weird things as well, that maybe we'll get into at some point. But Oingo Boingo to me was doing a lot with a lot of genre bending. As we said, there is some ska influence, less so than some of their earlier works, but still there, especially in composition of horn. And as I say that, that's another thing to point out, is that the band in general was using a lot of varied instrumentation. The actual touring band had horns and synths and your full regular like 4-piece ensemble. Actually, I think they had 2 guitars, if I'm thinking correctly, but they had that full outfit, right? So you had a lot of mixing, and with something as like sonically dense as new wave, to add in more seems like a really scary thing to do. But it's Danny Elfman. Danny Elfman is, after he got out of doing touring music, got into film and television composing. So obviously his compositional chops are astounding, because to go behind the scenes and do that, you need a lot of backing of that. And so all of the instruments mixing in there is something that I think a lot of new wave bands didn't have, that Oingo Boingo really brought to the party. It was really a lot of smart, varied composition within that. And that being said, it was some of the most fun for me is like Oingo Boingo stuff. A lot of new wave is dancey. That's sort of what it is. But this having that like little bit of ska influence, like I said, especially in the horn section, like parts, really gets me in a very deep level, I guess. And it's something that, like, because of that, you end up having a lot more to sink your teeth into than I think you do a lot of other albums from the same genre at a similar time frame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Roberto, how would you describe this album musically?
Well, it's funny that Drew brought up all like a lot of the new wave thing, because I'm definitely very familiar with that genre, especially that point in time, from bands like Aha and Tears for Fears. Try blanking on the band's name that did Girls on Film, and it's like one of my favorite bands too. But ultimately, when it came to this musically, because I didn't quite know, like, I knew this album, but I didn't know the history of Oingo Boingo until Drew had mentioned that they had a ska kind of influence. And then I started digging in more and deeper, as I was doing some research, and they had like Drew, you can kind of help me out with this. Like, what was it, like a troupe in the 70s or something like that?
Yeah. They had a theatrical surrealist performance art troupe, kind of vaudevillian, that was more headed up by Danny's brother Richard. But Danny was a part of, called the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo. Very, like it's that more surrealist performance art, very vaudevillian, very like a roaming theater troupe, as it were.
And the only reason I bring that up is because, like, the album itself, and you can hear like the ska in there, and you can hear the new wave. I mean, new wave is very much just, take guitar, put a synth in there, maybe add a little bit of rock beat, and sprinkle some English on there, and you've got new wave, at least the 80s. But what's interesting about this album is that, like, at times you can hear like, oh, that's more of a ska song. Wait, that's a new wave song, and then you kind of hear them even together at certain songs. Like, that sounds like that. The other thing I really enjoyed about it was that, especially knowing history and knowing where Danny Elfman would go on in terms of his career, is you can hearing again, it was like, I can hear all the quirkiness that Danny Elfman would later bring on to compositions. Like, I'll hear certain songs and go, oh, that's how he became to start doing these sort of movie compositions that sounded weird and quirky, because this is the guy that did the music for freaking Edward Scissorhands. And it's a weird composition. But musically, it feels like that bridge in time, because and it definitely is of its era, because if you think about the 80s, like we're coming into new wave. Two-tone is still there, but not quite as it's still prevalent, but still kind of more underground, depending on who you were. And you can definitely hear where the music was going to shift in terms of popularity, because, like, again, the 80s was defined by new wave, I would say, like in terms of at least that point in the 80s, like new wave and hip hop in certain parts.
I mean, you have an entire genre now that is specifically meant to ape the 80s, and most, if not all, of their like milieu compositionally almost comes from new wave.
Right, and that's sort of the thing, is that like new wave was like it's like new wave and synth wave were like the tones of the 80s in terms of that, like you're mentioning the idea that you can look back on that era, get that kind of sound, and make music that sounds of that kind of era. and Oingo Boingo as a band definitely showed that in their album for Dead Man's Party. But even the way they did it was like, no, there's way more ska in this than normally I'm used to in new wave, and I definitely dug that portion for sure again.
Yeah, I think you pretty much guys pretty much covered it as far as like the sound, but yeah, it is just a nice mix of sounds where it does pepper in that ska really well and into the new wave sound fundamentally, and it's just fun, catchy 80s tunes at the core, but that does it with these really fun weapons at their disposal, including like the horns but with the synths and the this and the that, and it all goes in really fun different places. And I think overall it's just a really cool, fun record. But let's get down to the nitty gritty of the tracks. Drew, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
So of course, one of possibly my favorite songs, period. We've mentioned it a little bit here. Dead Man's Party. It's one of those new wave songs that like I heard and realized like, okay, maybe there's more to this genre that I need to dig into. There's a lot going on. The horns, I think especially in this one, like highlight what horns can do great, which is they really undercut the vocals in a really, really cool way. They'll come in and surround it, and then as there's a longer vocal line, they'll just slowly come in and then back up around it, which I think is really cool. Really, really brilliantly done there. I'm going to talk about the other one, the other like really well-known single, and then come back around to something that I think is really cool. So Weird Science sort of ends it, and it has some of the best like just chorus feel on the entire record, as far as like the chorus is just really hitting and being really super catchy. It was written specifically for a movie, like that makes sense. Like John Hughes called him up and like he had started writing it in his head on the car ride home, and then like ran to a studio to like part it out. So like this was written for a movie, and because of that, it also feels really like slightly out of place on the record itself.
I was going to say the exact same thing on my take, Drew. It feels way out of place.
Yeah, and apparently, like, because of that, like, Danny Elfman has said in the past that, like, it almost doesn't feel like an Oingo Boingo song. Even when Oingo Boingo, like, at the end ended up as this weird alt-rock thing, but, like, even then, like, he was like, it doesn't feel like anything Oingo Boingo had done before or since, and it doesn't feel like an Oingo Boingo song. But it's still a great song. But then No One Lives Forever, I think is a song that, one, you have a new wave song with a bass line that is thick with 3 C's. It's something I'm going to get behind. It's bass. Don't know if you know. I like that a lot. And this one brings it
Would you say you're all about that bass?
I'm not all about that bass. I like some treble. But I prefer... I like a big bass, as it were. But also, it brings a little bit of that like punk rock influence into it. Like this was in '85, and I can like, you cannot tell me that Danny Elfman didn't listen to a shit ton of Combat Rock by The Clash. You just can't with this song. Like, it's just like that sound. It's like those ideals as far as like the music goes were all over this song. Maybe not the political ones, because Danny Elfman seems like he doesn't really get into politics a huge amount in the music he creates, which I think is smart, especially seeing where his future would go. But from the musical standpoint, very much getting into the ideals that the Clash had in Combat Rock like 3 years prior, I think is really, really cool.
Mm-hmm. Roberto, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
So because I don't want to do it over again, I'll try to keep my tracks to the ones, because a lot of them I should have drew. But of the hits, for sure, Just Another Day. But I've always liked that song a lot for just the kind of thematic of being this sort of weird song about like it's another day where everything goes wrong. And I kind of like sort of that tone, and kind of it kicks off a lot of what the album is. But of the ones that like haven't been said yet. I really enjoyed "Help Me." One, because for me it's the song that very much sounds like a new wave song as it kicks in. Like, it has a lot of those sort of tropes in terms of a synth, in terms of guitar riff and things like that. And then it kicks immediately to like more of a ska sound. And it's just like, what the heck? And it's like that weird bridge of a music song where it's like it somehow serves two masters, which shouldn't happen often in music. It's very rare to have a song that can serve both, not both the genres, but just both two masters at the same time, where it's like, oh, this guy's a ska song. Oh, this is a new wave song. Oh, we both can dance to it. That's awesome. Beyond that, I enjoyed Heard Somebody Cry. I kind of like that. And I kind of agree with Drew. Like I said, it's like Weird Science. It sticks out, but it sticks out because it felt like to me, it felt like the song, like, well, we released a single. We need to put something on the album people are going to buy for. Let's just put Weird Science at the very end. Of all this like really interesting sounding music, this all thematically sounding music, and it's like Weird Science, like, oh, okay, you literally are like the movie thing that they just tacked on at the end because they had to get put on some album at some point in time.
Yeah, because they wrote it. Yeah,
exactly.
It's like, oh, we wrote.
Like, we're gonna do an extended cut and put it on the album.
Because like I remember I was reading the story about Weird Science, and it was like apparently he Elfman like wrote it in like the car or something like that. Mm-hmm. Like he wrote it like in the car. It's like, yeah, I got this down. Like, that's hilarious because again, it's not a bad song. It's definitely like it's if you like the movie, cool. If you watch the TV show when it was on for the brief moment in time it was on, cool. If you don't know it. Like I think back to somebody who had come to this album later on, never knowing Weird Science, of an era, never knowing Weird Science, hearing about this band called Oingo Boingo, and hearing Dead Man's Party, going, "What's this song doing at the end? It just sounds out of place."
Yeah.
Not knowing any history.
Yeah. Yeah. Weird Science is it is out of place and crazy, but it's a nice like little ending, just to like have a nice little departure. And I will say, yeah, as somebody whose absolute number one favorite band is The Clash, the No One Lives Forever comparison, it works really well, and it just makes for a fantastic song. It's just a solid track. But obviously, everything you guys touched on, you pretty much kind of nailed it. Let's get down to the nitty gritty of, again, I keep saying that. It's like, I need to reserve that for the haiku reviews.
For some reason, that time when you said it though, my brain like started singing Mulan. Like, I was like, "You're really gonna defeat the Huns?" Okay,
yes,
like, that's fine.
Yes. Let's get down to the conclusive thoughts. Roberto.
Yes.
Kind of bring it back around the horn, and we're only just skipping one person. Roberto, what will be your conclusion on this album as a whole?
It's definitely an 80s album. There's no escaping that. It's definitely new wave. There's no escaping that. But as far as new wave goes, I think this. And it's such a weird thing for me to say because I love a lot of new wave and even current new wave, and you almost basically if you attach wave to it, I usually tend to like it. That's the very truth.
Korean wave,
Korean wave, dark wave, synth wave, vapor wave. If you attach a wave, chances are there's going to be something I like because a wave has a
64.
Certain... Yes, exactly. We could talk.
Okay.
It's a good game. It's just a 64 game. Not saying a bad thing, just and long story shorter.
Good water physics.
Long story shorter of things, I think what makes this album stand out, even among a lot of that, is just how interesting the compositions are. Like I drew in mentioning like how Danny Elfman, and we all know what he would end up doing, and if you want to look at that giant career, it's just phenomenal in terms of how many things he's composed in terms of films and whatnot. Any Tim Burton film, chances are, it has this composition of Danny Elfman behind it. But and I think that's what separates this from just a everyday 80s new wave album, and especially of that era. And I think it's why you could listen to it now being completely unaware of what what the 80s were about, or more importantly what Oingo Boingo was about, or anything like that. And it definitely feels like this is where that band produced probably the most unique work. And more importantly, too, this is definitely the thing I could present to somebody who is unaware of anything of the 80s, unaware of anything musically of that thing. I could play that for them, and they would still get something out of it. Like, oh, this is catchy. Oh, this is interesting. Who is this? This is Oingo Boingo. And I explain, if you like this, here's some other bands you check out.
Yeah, I think overall, the main takeaway is, at the core, this is a 80s album. This is a new wave ass.
I mean, it came out in 85. It better be an 80s ass. There's only a few things that came of that era that aren't 80s ass.
Yeah, and but I think that's not a detriment, and I think it works really well. It has a lot going for it. It has a lot of really cool things under the hood, and it plays well. And overall, at the end of the day, it's also just a really fun record of really fun songs that you can just kind of put on your radio and jam to them. And they're just solidly made and by a very talented composer and song creator and uncle-in-law to Dharma. Oddly enough, that's the other thing he has going for him. I think overall Oingo Boingo is A-OK. Drew, how would you conclude on this album?
I think that if you've ever heard a new wave song and it's pretty good, but there's not, it felt all pop, no substance. I think Oingo Boingo is the place where you want to go to get that deeper substance. It's Danny Elfman has been strange for years. And some people may have known his strange from movies, but he's been being strange well before that, folks, and it's usually come out pretty okay. It's something that I've said it before. I've gotten really into the retrowave, the outrun sort of thing, and the things along those lines, whether it be your Chromios and Pale Waves aping the genre, or whether it be your Kavinsky's and Laserhawks making techno dance music based on the 80s. It's something that I've gotten into, and you don't get that thought process without this one. And I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, overall, really fantastic, really fun record. Yeah. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of the main event of the evening, the moment we've all been waiting for, our haiku reviews. Let's get it popping, let's get it going. Haikumero numero uno, Roberto, what do you got for us?
On one end is ska. On the other is new wave. Album is the bridge.
Yeah. My haiku, 80s classic tunes with plenty under the hood. Just some good old fun. Last but not least, Drew, what is your haiku?
A band I adore for its sheer creative flair and genre bending.
Mm-hmm. Those are our haikus. That brings us to. I lost myself. Those are our haikus. Damn,
David, what is your haiku?
Yeah, David.
David, what is your haiku?
Awesome. That was
Amazing.
a great haiku. Yeah. Of course, you can find this album on our Spotify playlist. Play Record Breakers the home game. Do your due diligence and your due diligence. Following along at home, kind of do your homework, as it were. On that Spotify playlist will be next week's record. Finally, it is our guest's turn as we finish the cycle. The one providing the album is next week is Roberto, of course. Roberto, what do you have for us next week?
Well, I'm just going to bring it up. I'm just going to turn the electronica dial to 11. We are bringing The Prodigy's latest album, No Tourists.
Oh, yeah. As a as a resident of Miami, Florida, I can appreciate the sentiment. Yeah, so look forward to that next week, but that is next week and this is this week. And you can, of course, find us all over the internet. David is at Call Me DJM. Drew is at XTruciferX. Roberto is at Vincent404. I'm at PD Rave. The show is at 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers. RecordBreakersPodcast.com. RecordBreakersPodcast@gmail.com. Rebelli.net for listening to other shows. Rebelli TV on YouTube. Yeah, you can find us anywhere you find podcasts. Just subscribe, like, share, give us reviews, give us some feedback, let us know what you thought of the album, give us your haikus, do all the things. Until next time, hasta los huevos.
Toodaloo.
Goodbye.
I have to poop.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.